I wasn't a tech founder, I didn't win the lottery, and I didn't get an inheritance. But by 30, I had a net worth over $1 million. And I want to show you exactly how I did it.
And how you can too. Step number 1. Before I started to do anything, I started with a proper cash reserve. Now, why a cash reserve? A cash reserve is essentially an emergency fund, typically 6 to 12 months worth of expenses that you set aside in a bank account like a checking or a savings account. The rate of return on this account is not that important. What is really important is the liquidity aspect of it. Account should be there for emergencies or for opportunities. Step number 2. After setting up that emergency fund, I started saving into my 401k plan right away. Why did I do that? It actually turns out that I fell into it. When I got my first job, I started working at American Express as a financial advisor. And when I was signing up for benefits, I was looking at health insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, and then of course my 401k plan. Naturally, not really knowing much about the 401k plan, I reached out to the person behind me, a gentleman named Jason, who I asked, "Hey, Jason, do you think I should do the 401k plan?" And without skipping a beat, Jason said, "Absolutely. In fact, for you, that's probably one of the most important benefits that we have here." Without thinking twice, I signed up. When it came time to decide how much to put in the 401k plan, of course, Jason said, "Just put the maximum and don't even worry about it." So I hit that box that said maximum. It basically gave me the ability to put in up to $13,500, which was the maximum you could save inside of a 401k plan at that time. I was only making about $18,800 that year as part of my base salary. When I got my next paycheck, I had the crazy realization that I had put in roughly 90% of my paycheck and that I was only getting a check for about $100. I went right back to Jason. I said, "Jason, what did you do? I'm not making any money." And he looked at me and said, "Carl, you'll make money. Just keep focusing on making more and more of a salary. Besides, you're living with your parents right now. You have no bills. What do you need money for anyway?" So I never really ended up changing it. And since that day, I've been maxing out my 401k plan ever since. You'll see in just a second when we go through some numbers what that kind of haphazard decision led to over time. I also chose to pay it forward by asking my wife when she started working at her company to start maxing out the 401k plan. And her story is a little bit different in that initially when I asked her to put the maximum amount in her 401k plan, her employer actually said, "No, you can't really do this much. What you're asking to do, which is 70% of your paycheck, is not something our plan allows." And I had to go to her employer and let them know that it's actually not something that you should try to restrict people on. And in fact, there's no state or federal laws that restrict somebody from maxing out their 401k plan. And they ultimately ended up amending their plan to allow her to put more money into her 401k than anybody had ever thought was reasonable. But you'll see in just a second that between her and my 401k plans, this was one of the biggest reasons why we built up our net worth over $1 million before the age of 30. Third, I bought my house and I stayed there. This is something that a lot of people don't really do because they buy a house, they'll upgrade a couple of years later, then they'll upgrade again, then they'll upgrade again. And I think that's a huge mistake. In fact, many of my most successful clients, this is the one thing that they have in common. They might have a starter house when they first get married or when they're single, but then they go in and buy their forever house almost immediately. And when they buy that forever house, even though they might be stretching a little bit at first, they will save tons and tons of money versus upgrading every couple of years. So let's go through why this works out the way that it does. When we first graduated from college, I remember Melissa and I decided to move to Swartz Creek. This was equidistant between my job, which was in Troy, and her job, which was to go to vet school at Michigan State University. It was right in the middle of nowhere. Ultimately, what we thought was we're going to live here for a couple more years until she graduates, and then we're going to move to a place that we want to ultimately live, and that'll be our forever house. We bought that house when we first got married in 2005. By 2008, she had graduated, and it was time to move. And ultimately, because I bought that house and was planning on selling it within 3 years, we made no money on that house. There was the financial crisis. The house had actually depreciated in value, and what we had bought it for and what we put into it wasn't worth what it was. We took a loss on the sale of that house. But I learned from that mistake and said to myself, I'm never going to buy a house with the intention of selling it 3 years later. That is not appropriate holding period for an asset like a house that should be held long term. So my next house, I wanted to make sure was something that we could live in for a long time. We looked at schools, we looked at the area in terms of the proximity to our jobs, we looked at proximity to our family, and we found a house in Ortonville that we really loved. It was the third house that we bid on in 2008, and we ended up moving in just a couple of months later. We bought it as a short sale from a bank. That house we were able to only buy because we had built up the emergency fund, the cash reserve that I told you about in step one. So actually the great decision to have that emergency fund allowed us to take the opportunity that came in step three, which is buying our forever house, because we had cash. Wouldn't have had I not done that step, had I gone straight to step 2 and done my 401k, for example. And now I used that emergency fund to buy into this forever house that ended up appreciating immensely over the next couple of years. That, it turned out, ended up being one of the perfect times to buy a house because it was in the heart of the financial crisis. A lot of people were having foreclosures and evictions, and it created this opportunity for us to buy a house that otherwise we would have never been able to afford. So by buying that house, we ended up locking in at a very low, not just interest rate, but at a very low point in the market. And we've now seen that house double and almost triple in value since then. Why am I telling you all of this, and why is this all important in terms of bringing it all together? Because in many cases, when you're buying a house, the thing that you don't realize is not only when you move is it expensive to move because you're paying realtor commissions, you're paying state transfer taxes, you need new furniture, you need to paint the place, get new carpeting. It's also extremely non-conducive to your financial plan. Every single time you make a move like this, right, it creates a lot of disruption. It creates a lot of wasted energy. And so buying one place and staying there for 15, 20, 30 years actually makes so much more financial sense. So the 3 steps that I use that I think you can use to get to over $1 million before the age of 30 is: number 1, build up that emergency fund, 6 to 12 months worth of cash on hand in your bank account. If you need a bank account that pays more interest, feel free to call us. We have a Verde Flourish savings account that pays 4% interest right now and is one of the best in the country. Number 2, after you've built up your cash reserve account, you can start saving and maxing out your 401k plan. I would tell you to be not just aggressive in your savings, but aggressive in your strategy here. Look at it as an opportunistic account that you can use for your retirement, and something where you can actually take a little bit of risk because it's not an account that you're really going to be accessing for 20 or 30 years. That account can be a little bit more opportunistic and have a higher allocation to investments like stocks, for example, versus lower risk investments like bonds. And third, buy your forever home, even if you have to stretch a little bit at first, and stay there, because once you stay there, you'll appreciate faster than if you upgrade every couple of years and you pay state transfer taxes, insurance, and realtor commissions, which will dilute your return. And when you do these 3 things in combination, you're going to see that your wealth will catapult so much faster. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, hit that notifications icon. We post videos every Wednesday. Stay tuned for our next series, where Morgan Galvin from Verde will be talking to you about home improvements and how to maximize the value of your home improvements, doing it on a budget and doing it on time. Stay tuned for that.